but I'm going to start us off with a poem, and it is one which is very close to me in terms of climate and in leadership and in terms of women, because I feel as though, as a young person who's been living in New York and who's had to find herself in the realm of advocacy work and what leadership even means, because I think that leadership is more than a title, but it's embedded in your actions and the way in which you present yourself to the people around you and build communities like this one. So this poem is definitely embedded in that intergenerational conversation and an intersectionality, which I will discuss a little bit later on as well. This is Lineage. Lineage. We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children. A Native American proverb. There is a mother here. Her skin has known the salt of broken oceans. Her hands have traced the sun until it became her. She learned respect from a father and his hands. How the bones of dead flowers made their garden a burial ground. Her body was her family's burial ground, her mouth an untamed flame. It escaped and left her with a vase. In it, her reflection appeared and shattered. There is a brother here. He's learned to breathe air as dark as his skin. There are no lights in a city of stars that do not reach him. Some days, he feels paper weight. In his dreams, he is flying. He's forgotten the smell of grass in his mother. He's forgotten the sounds of the wind, what it means to fly. In his dreams, he carries a star in his pocket, but it burns from the inside out. It reminds him of himself, that there is a burning within him. There is a father here. He overflows into his mother's garden. Her flames lick his stubborn skin as he swallows the ocean whole. He writes odes to himself until his blood becomes a dead rose. And as the sea levels rise, as they run like a crimson-mouthed psalm, as children curl like wayward leaves, as storms shake their sea blue hands, as these hands overturn burial grounds, as burial grounds become his mother, a father becomes a son in mourning. There is a daughter here. She has been taught to sustain on seeds, but to never settle for them, to treat the grounds as she treats her body, to till the earth until she too is the sun. When morning arrives, she finds the shattered reflections of her mother and recalls the pieces. Countless oceans converging where she stands, you can hear an echo of lineage, the sound of 1,000 daughters, mothers, sons, and fathers. How they become a garden, how their voices bloom among the scattered bones and carry, like seeds, to wind. Thank you. And that was a poem that I wrote almost a year ago when I was in upstate New York, because during the pandemic, I moved from the city and I was very connected with nature and the landscape around me. From my window, you could see a river outside. That is how close I was. And I feel as if by being in that space and by becoming more connected with the natural landscape around me, I also became more connected with myself, because I became the US Youth Poet Laureate during the pandemic. It was in March, so it was just a few months in when no one knew what to do or how to feel in terms of being isolated, because I think that what we've learned over the past year or more than a year now has been how to unify virtually and what unity truly means in spaces that are virtual and how to find people to connect with. I know that when I started in poetry and even in my journey, I actually began advocacy work in women's empowerment spaces. During my freshman year, I joined a youth leadership council in New York City. And it was specifically on the topic of women's empowerment and gender equity work. I had no idea what I was doing. I know that after years and a lot of practice, it often seems like we know what we're doing when really everything is a growing and evolving process and we're all learning together. So I started out by creating a forum similar to this one, or a summit on women's empowerment and how to empower women through the arts, because we had a talent showcase with many young girls across the city reading poems or singing songs about how they're feeling in the current moment and the futures that they're imagining. Because I do believe that art opens new windows to experience and shows us what the world could look like in 10 years, in 100 years, because art is imagining and bringing lived experiences to the forefront of solution building, because I believe that these narratives are irrefutable and should be treated as such when we're thinking about the negotiatory tables, for example. Because if we consider the table, it's not about just pulling up a chair to them, but reforming what the table looks like, as it's historically been something that we need to change and that needs to be more inclusive. So I started out in that forum, and I think it was the support, or rather, I know that it was the support of the youth leaders around me, which drove me to continue to inspire. Because it was during that forum that a girl who was she was in a shelter at the moment, a woman's shelter, and she was actually not a part of the lineup in terms of speaking. We had a lot of speakers, and she asked, "Can I read a poem?" And we went with it, because that's what these experiences are about, and that's what these communities are about, bringing voices to the table, but also making people feel like they can be heard if they choose to or want to speak. So she began speaking or reading her poem about her relationship with her biological mother, and told us how much that experience meant to her. And actually, during my first spoken word poetry competition, or rather it was a performance, it was on climate, which is interesting to think about now, because it feels like I've definitely went full circle. But another stranger came up to me and told me that being able to speak on climate justice and intersectional environmentalism was something that she had always wanted to do, but she felt like she couldn't speak on the stage due to her prior stage fright and things like that. And I saw myself in her. And that was what drove me, again, to continue the movements that I do and continue writing, because I know that it doesn't seem like it, as I've been rambling on for around 5 minutes now. But I used to have a lot of social anxiety and stage fright. My teachers had to send notes home because I couldn't speak in class. And it was even for the most basic of things. I used to tell people, if they asked me for my opinion on different matters, that, "Oh, I don't have an opinion, just go with whatever you like." And I would keep it to myself. And I remember something else was that my teachers, or rather my dad, would give me a quarter to say hello to my teachers in the morning, because it was just that bad. I couldn't speak, I couldn't vocalize, to the point where I didn't know how to socialize or interact with the people around me. And I think the moment when I realized that things needed to change was, I remember hiding under a table in class, because there were people who were saying things and whispering, and you know how kids can be sometimes. And my dad also once told me, when I was riding a roller coaster, or was very afraid of riding it and was on the line, shaking but still going for it, he said, "Bravery is not having no fear, but continuing to move and be yourself in spite of that fear." And that was something that I took with me. So when I joined choir, when I joined my school speech team, as I continue speaking at different events and performing, I just remember that it's okay to be scared. When you're taking these positions of leadership, it's okay to be scared. And in terms of imposter syndrome, we all experience that sometimes, but we have to go for it and continue believing in ourselves, because that's the first step to moving. And that's the first step to groundbreaking innovation. in climate now, I'm working very much so in policy. Sometimes I'm the only young person in the room, and that can be daunting because I feel like that's an additional layer of catching up when you see people who have bachelor's degrees in the majors that I'll be applying in or not applying in because I'm going to college. I'm currently on a gap year, but that I'll be taking next year. It's something that I've always considered. How am I supposed to operate in these spaces? But I think that we need to dismantle and reconstruct how we see knowledge and what we have to offer, because every single one of us has something to offer to these spaces. Every voice is valued. I know that in climate, that's the reason why I'm trying to create an initiative right now, the Climate Care Initiative, in order to uplift BIPOC women within climate justice centered spaces through the arts, through lived experiences, because I've noticed when I went to COP26, so to explain a little bit about Stockholm Plus 50, but it's a UN conference which is happening in the summer, and it's going to have an intergovernmental summary in terms of a meeting. So right now I'm working on a policy paper with other young people across the globe with the United Nations Environmental Program and the government of Sweden to mobilize towards that moment. But prior to that, when I was at COP in Glasgow, I went to a summit or a gathering in this small room that was the She Changes Climate Summit. And I learned that women, or I rather knew, because this is happening in a lot of movements, but women are leading grassroots movements. Women are leading NGOs and are the ones who are truly fighting for change on the local level, grassroots level, internationally, while they're not given that same recognition in terms of creating the decisions, in terms of decision making. And that was something that really struck me once again, because right now the Commission on the Status of Women is happening in New York, or it's happening in a hybrid sense. And the topic is how natural disasters are disproportionately impacting women in terms of how they're exacerbating over time. And we often think about climate change as the future, or it's about youth's futures, it's about women's futures, it's about Indigenous leaders and global South futures, when it's impacting people now. All of these issues are impacting people now at rates that we can't even fathom, or many people are experiencing differently, because intersectionality, to explain that word, derives from Kimberly Crenshaw, and it's about how different aspects of identity can combine to increase or decrease one's privilege in relation to different issues as well. And thinking about that and knowing that right now this conference is happening virtually, but many of our audience members are in California. California is experiencing wildfires at rates which are unheard of. In terms of the drought, I read that it was 1 in 1,000 years, while in Australia, on the other side of the world, there's a 1 in 1,000 year flood, which boggles the mind if you consider it. And that's why we need women. We need women, and we already have had women in our positions of leadership. We've had women fighting for this change, but women should not feel obligated to have to fight for this change, because it should already be there. There should be equity, and we need to acknowledge that. And we need to acknowledge the fact that identities and the way that we move, again, is evolving, and that this is a process. So never feel like you aren't enough, because you are enough, and we need all of you in this. We need all of you in this movement and taking courses, or like this fellowship that was amazing to have been created, because it's this creation, it's these initiatives that we're making that is the future of the world, but also is the now. It is the present. So I'm going to read another poem to close us off. And it's about women leadership. And I wrote it very recently because it is Women's History Month. And I think that keeping that present in our spaces and in our minds as well, it's not just about remembering women in history, and not just about celebrating them, but also remembering their actions in terms of the fact that we have to act now, and celebrating them by mobilizing now. So that is how we can truly remember them and celebrate their actions, by pushing them forwards and pulling them forwards. because we queens fix each other's crowns. That was one of the first statements, or one of the many amazing quotes that I've heard before. So this poem is Lead Her. She does not lead to please, woman holding the world in her hands, a daring daughter of incendiary moments who stands in solidarity. Strong as her body autonomy includes using her words to move and reform society piece by piece in her name. She, woman, gardener, earth maker, ceiling breaker, undefinable, but undeniably determined and unshakable. Woman is the psalm on a Saturday afternoon calling you to see her. Woman is on the moon, in the lab, the lead her you notice in the mirror. Woman marches with loud limbs, unapologetic here, her voice rings clearer. Woman is a CEO parting with the skyline whilst another says goodbye to her son. Woman builds both from the ground until they become a part of this planet's history, being passed so that they no longer need her. We are leaving a legacy. For leading means sharing the stage, where history reminds us of those who have come before, and the future sets the page iridescent in the mystery of women daring to defy, daring as sisters in arms. Being woman, a revolution, where she is more than what we need. Now, she is also the solution. Thank you so much. And thank you for all of your quotes in the chat and questions. I'll be happy to answer them soon.
Thank you. Thank you, Meera. Hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Rupal Hollenbeck. I'm going to help Meera navigate this incredible chat. So first and foremost, thank you, Meera. Thank you for sharing your message. Thank you for sharing so much about yourself. Inspiring doesn't do it justice. There are a couple of questions in the chat that I think are just so appropriate, and I want to address a couple of them now with you. So the first question is really about how you're operating at this really interesting intersection with sort of artistry and this amazing artistry and creativity together with leadership. So how do you look at that intersection of artistry and creativity coming together with leadership to sort of power your purpose? Can you talk a little bit about that intersection?
Yeah, it's no problem at all. And I feel like art, though it's given me a voice, it's also allowed me or made space for me to empower my communities in a way at which it feels like they're going to continue these movements forward. Because I like to say that when I walk on a stage, I don't walk alone. And in the end, I might be the first, but I'm not the end. And the beginning, it's everything that we're moving towards. And these movements, they're only the beginning of so much more that we have to expect and we'll see. And I believe that leadership, even though I am an artist and I consider myself a creative in my poetry, leadership is interdisciplinary. You can be a leader in a multitude of fields. And as I was saying before, leadership is more than a title. You can be a leader within the household. You can be a leader in your community. You can be a leader internationally. There's a multitude of ways to get involved. And I think that's so important to embody, because I think something that we consider in terms of imposter syndrome is that we constantly compare ourselves to other people, when I think that it's important to focus on our own journeys, because I know that I derive so much joy from creativity. And I feel like art has brought lived experiences to the table in terms of social justice issues, because a lot of these issues are intertwining, intersectional in terms of the sustainable development goals and gender equality, for example. As I was talking about climate, it intersects, but it also intersects in housing and food security. So I do believe that leadership is interdisciplinary, it's intersectional, it's intergenerational, which is why leadership, it varies and it's dependent on how you view leadership, because leadership's undefinable. You define it for yourself.
So great. That's wonderful. And speaking of generations, so there's another question. As you look around within your own generation, um, there are so many young people today who are troubled. They are troubled. They are troubled from the pandemic. They are troubled from war, from climate change, gender inequality, racial inequality. There's so many issues in the world today that can sometimes bring young people down. What is your message to your generation around how to navigate all this complexity and hardship in the world, and how to actually come through it stronger to enable the generation versus to really be brought down by these issues?
I think the first most important point is that we all experience that same amount of anxiety or feeling as if the world is on our shoulders, because it really does sometimes. You consider all of these issues and you're watching the news and you're wondering, what can I do about these macro scale issues that seem so apart from us in terms of countrywide barriers or opportunity barriers, but at the same time are impacting all of us in different ways. So I would say, first, you need to prioritize yourself, because changing the world and caring for other people first means caring for yourself, because your mental health is important in leadership and in vying for these issues and creating these movements. You have to understand that even if you step back for a little while, even if you take that rest that you most definitely need, and you certainly need, you're going to have your community and multiple people and multiple hands that are supporting you in this process. Because again, to repeat, it is a process. And the second point is to never lose hope. I love art because it calls to hope and what could be, because I think that even though all of these issues impact us in the present moment, we have to be future seeking and understand that if we limit ourselves, if we say, oh, that is impossible, it's as if you're missing 100% of the shots that you don't take. So never limit yourself and open yourself up to all of those limitless possibilities, because there is still time. I know that 2030 is still approaching, but we have time to change the narrative in climate, change the narrative in gender equity, and make sure that we mobilize faster than we could possibly consider or we have considered in the past, because doing so, again, it is possible, it is viable. So that is what I would say to young people, because again, you matter and we need all of you together as a collective to unify. But first, you need to prioritize yourself, because every individual and changing an individual life is equivalent to changing the world.
Oh, what a wonderful message to wrap up this session. Inspiring doesn't do it justice. I think it's been a wonderful time spent with you. Thank you so much again for sharing your message and for sharing so much of yourself with us this morning.
Thank you as well for inviting me to this amazing forum. I'm looking forward to seeing what all of the other inspiring speakers have to say today.